carbon to nitrogen ratios have to go right along with microbial activity. So how many of y'all are taking a Haney test? Okay, so when we do that, one of the things we look at is CO2 respiration, just like I was talking about with that tube, and we've got one buried in the field over here we're going to look at here in a minute. The more microbial activity you have, the higher you can push your carbon to nitrogen ratios because they can consume all of that carbon. So the analogy I like to use is like, think of it like babies versus high school football players, right? So if you got a new baby in the house and it's maybe 6 months old, what's it eating? Milk, formula maybe, a little bit of stuff like that. Things that are easy to chew, easy to digest.
In ounces.
In ounces.
In ounces.
Right? You're not feeding them pounds. So when we're looking at this carbon to nitrogen ratio and you've got low CO2 respiration, think of low respiration like a baby. So you probably need to have lower rates and keep that carbon to nitrogen ratio lower. So when we talk about carbon to nitrogen, think about carbohydrates and protein, because that's really what we're talking about here. Now, as your respiration goes up and you've got high school football players, now it becomes a challenge to keep enough food in the refrigerator, right? How many of y'all, I'll wait till he shuts that off. How many of y'all, which I mean, I guess I could have a 20-year-old kid if I wanted, but I don't. So how many of y'all have like high school boys in the house? Or if you had high school boys in the house?
Do they eat you out of house and home?
Right?
Can't keep enough food to them, right?
That's what it's like in your soil. Like, you've got to apply a lot of carbon and they'll just keep consuming it. If you go out there a year later and you still have residue on your soil from that cover crop from the year prior, you're tying up. You're probably limiting yourself on nitrogen there.
So do y'all have an initiative up in Minnesota to like capture every ounce of nitrogen with cover crops? Is that kind of what the going is up here? Not yet.
There's programs to try to reduce this stuff.
Yeah. Well, the reason I'm asking, like where I'm at, North Carolina, right above us in Virginia, we've got the Chesapeake watershed. And the state pays them to plant cereal rye, but they can't plant less than 2 bushels. That's 120 pounds. So do you think that that's a benefit to the farmer? Because what David's talking about, that area is predominantly more sand than it is clay. We see less water holding capacity. We see less nutrient cycling, and the farmer is limited that they got to put 2 bushels of rye out there. Now they are locking up a boatload of nitrogen and they don't have a lot of weeds in the spring. But the problem is they plant corn and it comes up and it's stunted and it's yellow and everybody says, oh God, the allelopathic effect got me. It's just the fact that they don't have any nitrogen. And so like in our cover crops, like our corn planter that we built, we have in furrow and 2x2. If you're going into high residue cover crops, or if you're going into even medium residue cover crops and you have low biology, you need something to kickstart that plant because it doesn't have a lot of nutrition up front. You know, there's farmers that we talked to yesterday. Hey, I was putting out in furrow fertilizer and my corn looks decent, but we stopped the planter and we didn't turn the fertilizer off and we put more fertility out right here and the corn's another foot or 2 taller. You know, that right there shows that they don't have the cycling of nutrients for those younger plants because of either soil biology or cover crop tie-up. I didn't ask them which one it was, but it's one of those 2 factors. Because there's only 3 ways that we typically see fertility become available. It's microbial activity, it's either weathering, or it's chemistry. Those are the 3 factors how we see nutrients cycle in the profile and become plant available. And so if you're having issues like that, if you've got a Haney test, not only does the Haney test give you microbial activity, but it also tells you that carbon to nitrogen ratio of the soil. So if you're coming out here to a cornfield, 12 to 14 is really good. That's kind of the middle of the road. We see good cycling. You start getting below 12, you start getting what we call a leaky system, and you're going to start flushing more nutrients through the profile too fast. If you go over 14, you see nitrogen cycling slow down to the point where it can't keep up with rapid plant development. Now, if you go in a bean field and it's a 16 or 18 to 1, you're probably not going to see the same issue as what you're seeing out here in a cornfield if you were at that same 16 to 18 to 1. So.
And the nitrogen, you want to mention the form though, that
We're gonna go over that at 3 o'clock. But no, it's a good question. I mean, it's even corn prefers different forms of nitrogen, whether it's a V stage or whether it's an R stage. And we'll even talk about, you know, how many of you here, I mean, just show of hands, how many of you have ever heard that plants actually, corn plants will actually take nitrate nitrogen and convert them back to ammonium? Anybody? I mean, there's not a lot of people that talk about that. But even, that's why we see side dressing. If you're going out with wide drops or you're broadcasting over the top V6, V8, or you're running it with an airplane or a drone, we see a benefit to having ammonium forms of nitrogen later in the season where that plant doesn't have to make that process and convert it back. And that's just wasted energy that plant's making that conversion instead of putting it into that ear. Yep.
I could have rode on the other trailer. We have Holstein, I mean, we have dairy. So you talk about the rye being put in and it sucks up all the nitrogen. A lot of the farmers out east have cattle, like say dairy. And now you took your rye off, they harvest it for forage, and they come back with a tanker load of liquid manure, which has a lot of nitrogen. Now does that solve the nitrogen problem because they come back with manure versus having rye laying on the ground, like you said, taking months to break down? Does that manure cycle shorten up that nitrogen replacement cycle?
I would say some, not all.
Okay, because that has to convert to you.
Yep.
That would be faster than the breakdown of the rye. Because I know some of them are successfully growing pretty good silage.
Yeah, I would say that solves some of the problem, but not the problem in all of it itself. Because, like you said, you've got to have, when we start looking at carbon cycling, biological activity, and when you're removing that residue, and you're seeing a change in biological, and then typically farmers that are applying manure are not applying manure at the proper rates. They want to go out here and get on 15,000 gallons, and then you're going to push it anaerobic, which is going to set back biological activity for that cycling. So you're trading out of one pocket into the other.
And you probably see it in your environment. How many poultry buildings do you have around you?
We got a lot.
A lot of hog buildings probably, right?
Yeah.
All right, so even with the dairy, most guys are going to apply that manure thinking we're going for the nitrogen, right? Well, the nitrogen's probably the lowest factor in there compared to phosphorus and your K. And so you ended up getting maybe high P levels that start tying up other nutrients. So we got to start looking at our soils completely different and understand, how many of y'all have heard of Liebig's Law of the Minimum, right? And so that's what, when I was in sales, we sold on that, you know? Well, how many of y'all have ever heard of the Mulder's chart, right? So you've got these different nutrients that are antagonistic and synergistic to each other. So if you have something that's way too high, potentially it's tying up something else. And that's our big problem with a lot of manure as well. And one thing I wanted to mention on that nitrogen too is when you go and plant, let's say you don't have starter fertilizer and you spray nitrogen on that cover crop residue, what happens to that nitrogen?
About 80% is going in your residue.
Exactly, because the microbes are sitting there and they have, or that carbon's got all that, there's a lot of carbon there, it's low in nitrogen, so it's getting tied up there. And then the microbes are the first feeders. It's just like our own gut, right? When we eat, does that steak nourish us directly, or does it feed the microbes in our gut? The microbes break it down and make it so we can use it, right? So cattle nutrition, it's all the same. Your microbes in the rumen, they're the first feeders on that. So when we spray UAN on that residue, the microbes are going to use it first. They're going to tie it up because they have all the carbon they need. They just lack nitrogen. So, you know, if we terminated a cover crop that is maybe as tall as this grass here, it's going to probably decompose pretty quick and mineralize back out. You start getting into some of that 3-4 foot tall stuff, it's going to take longer. And like Russell said, you have 120 pounds compared to 60 pounds, it's going to take longer. If you have 60 compared to 10 or 20 pounds, it's going to take longer.
And you don't hear a lot of people talk about this, but we just talked about there's a carbon to nitrogen ratio in the soil. There's a carbon nitrogen ratio in cover crops. Biology has a carbon to nitrogen ratio. Now, it's disputed where the range is, but we're going to say it's a general term of 10-to-1 to 14-to-1. So if those microbes have all of this cover crop residue that's this tall, and they're chewing on all that lignin material, what do they have to eat? They're going to balance themselves. So if we're consuming carbon, what are microbes going to consume as well? Nitrogen. So now we can actually see some nitrogen tie up in the biological process if we're giving them too much carbon too fast. And so, you know, there's about 6 different carbon and nitrogen ratios that we're paying attention to on our farm, because it's, I mean, if you're wanting to push maximum return on investment for the practices that we're doing, you've got to start studying all of these different factors. And I don't even know it all. I don't understand it all. I read some of these white papers that they publish and I get a headache. But who else wants to talk about an issue they're having in row cropping? Anybody?
I got a question. So, tie-up is the problem. What's the solution?
Are we talking about tie-up?
Well, when we're saying, you know, like if you had a big rye crop and you got a bunch of nitrogen tied up in that, how do you combat that?
So if we're seeing tie-up in rye cover crop, the easiest way to combat that is plant something other than rye. So like I'm planting oats, triticale, and rye. I use all 3 of those small grains, or like what David Brandt was studying before he passed is if you plant the same cover crop blend more than 3 years, the biology becomes just as stagnant as if you were in monoculture corn for 3 years. And so we'll swap oats out for barley, or we'll swap out, you know, different legumes. Instead of planting red crimson clover, we'll put in balanza every couple years, and we swap those cover crops up. But like, you can balance that seed to N ratio even in your seed decisions. So we know rye is going to be 60 to 80 to 1. We know triticale is going to be 40 or 50 to 1. We know oats are going to be 30 or 40 to 1. We know barley's a little bit less. We know wheat's maybe a little bit more, 52 to 1. And so we can look at, now I've got 3 small grains with 3 different carbon to nitrogen ratios. Oats are going to break down typically for me about V6, V8. Well, when that oat residue breaks down, what's in that residue? Nutrients. So we're spoon feeding the nutrients out of the oats. The triticale for me is breaking down right around tassel time. That's another nutrient pass that this crop's going to see that I didn't have to do in a piece of machinery. Then you can put in clovers, vetch, peas. There's a lot of legumes that we can put in there to balance that out. Now typically those legumes are going to be about a 15 to 1. They're going to break down probably within 4 weeks of termination. That's a spoon feed to that young corn plant. And we're not only spoon feeding those nutrients, but organic nitrogen doesn't evaporate and it doesn't leach. So the environmental problems that we're trying to solve with some of these cover crops with nitrate loads in the water table, we can actually combat with having these organic forms of nitrogen that we're building. And if you don't test, it's just a guess. That's one of the things I picked up from a testing company, and it's probably been one of the things I've said the most. I'm going to show you, a picture later today of a cover crop nutrient analysis. I know exactly how much NPK, what my carbon to nitrogen ratio is. I can actually have a scientific estimation of what my nutrient release is going to be out of that cover crop for that year, so that I can take an actual educated understanding of what my nutrients are going to be out of that cover crop. Because if you read a cover crop guide from any seed company, we've got 50 pounds from crimson clover, and we've got 100 pounds from vetch, and we've got 80 pounds from winter peas, and you put balanza clover in there, and that's another 80 pounds. Well, that means that I should have at least 400 pounds of nitrogen if I put those 4 seeds in, right? No. When you put those 4 seeds in, they're still not going to make the nitrogen that we would see out of a solid stand of that cover crop. And so now we can see all of these details for 18 bucks. You know, you take a 40-acre field and spend $18, but you know exactly how much nutrients you have of 14 different nutrients that are going to be released in that season. That's a cheap investment. That's where we're spending we're spending a couple bucks and we're saving a couple hundred. And so that's the way we can do it on the cover crop side. If you're looking on, nitrogen tie up in the soil, well, you take eastern North Carolina, where I'm from, the organic matter out there is 30 to 50%. And it's sand, it's black sand. But the problem is the water table at best is 6 inches deep in the middle of the summer. It's anaerobic. So that you never see that cycling. They should not plant cover crops that have cereals in it. They don't need to add any more carbon to that system. They need legumes to build nitrogen and balance out that ratio for not only soil biology, but also for the plant. And so when you look at a Haney test, if you're looking at a Haney test where this field was in alfalfa, just say if Grant would have saw this field at a 20-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, he should not plant, you know, cereal rye into this field. If it's at 20-to-1, he should be planting real heavy on legumes and brassicas to bring that C to N ratio down so that we can see the soil cycle that nitrogen faster. If he's on the other side of the spectrum and say this is a sand hill and it's a 8-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio on the Haney test, he wants to be heavier on those cereals to build that C to N ratio up. Does that make sense?
And I mean, there's a couple things there. So a couple years ago, I had an opportunity to meet with some John Deere engineers that were working on some trials in the field. And they were looking at no-till, strip-till, conventional till, with and without cover crops. And they got their recommendations. Apparently, Iowa State has a cover crop expert, and he recommended 75 pounds of cereal rye ahead of corn. Okay, and the big thing was plant it green. So they planted that 75 pounds of cereal rye in front of corn. They planted it green when that cereal rye was about 3 foot tall.
Yeah.
And they've actually applied 70 more pounds of nitrogen on it, and the corn was still yellow. They could not outcompete it. And they're cussing the cover crop. And it wasn't the cover crop's fault. It was the advice given to them, right? And so Russell and I, we can sit here and talk about legumes that him and I can grow in the South, but we have an unfair advantage of heat, right? When's your first killing frost?
October 1.
October 1, mid-September. When's your last frost?
You know what I started telling people? I said, God didn't give us wings, but he let us make airplanes. I need to fly south for the winter.
There you go. See, God ain't gonna, we can't give you another 20 or 30 days to grow a crop here, right? So in my environment, I could wait until after Mother's Day to start planting corn and be great. Now, I might catch a frost, you know, not really a frost, but the cool down happens shortly after I hit black layer. And so it's gonna take a long time for that corn to dry down, right? But I can grow all the nitrogen I want, you know, potentially, with those legumes. Up here, you're not gonna grow that much legume. But just like this grass, like we talked about that cereal rye, that when it's like this, before you get stem elongation, it's highly vegetative. You could have a 14-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio right there from terminating it early. Another management thing you could do is maybe go in there and Matt Griggs, he does this with a hooded sprayer, you know, and spray out strips. And then plants into those strips that he sprays out early. That may be something we look at doing, you know. It's just a different version of kind of strip till, or
Unplugging air seeders, like we've seen guys where they, if they're running on RTK.
Yes.
So if you're running on RTK, you got an air seeder, or even if you got a regular, you know, box drill, you can plug off those rows where you're going to be planting, have 7.5, 8 inches there, where you've got fresh, warmer soils where you can plant into it and have cover crops beside of it. And if you're in a more northern environment like this, I don't recommend delaying termination on corn. Corn will get tall and leggy. Beans, you can delay that termination a little bit longer and not see any detriment to those beans, and that just helps build organic matter, that soil aggregation, all the things that we've talked about so far. So you can add that into the rotation. Maybe on bean years, you're pushing that termination back a little bit on the beans.
So if you were to do chemical, let's just call it chemical strip till.
Yeah.
And we get a year like this where we're planting corn into rye that's 36, 48 inches tall. Do you think that corn's still going to get leggy then, that it's going to hurt it?
Not if you're rolling it. So if you're if you're doing the chemical strip till like David was talking about, like Matt Griggs and a couple guys are doing, the only time corn gets leggy is when it competes for sunlight. I see so many times that farmers will plant into cover crops this tall and they don't roll ahead or they don't roll after, and they'll leave that cover crop up and it starts shading this plant out, and you'll see that plant elongate and get yellow and leggy. It doesn't handle wind at that point, and it really doesn't like.
It's a big mosquito.
Who's flying that? Can you fly that like right here? I got a T50, and I figured out on there's a stalker mode where it'll follow you, and They thought I was crazy, but man, that thing makes a really nice breeze. I was trying to figure out how to mist myself without growing another leg or something, but we might have to buy one that we don't put chemicals through on that one. But you know, like what Grant's talking about on corn, you've got to get that cover crop down before that VE emerges. On beans, I've seen guys terminate as late as second trifolia, third trifolia, whether it be chemistry, whether it be rolling. Now crimping, that's a whole different ball game. I don't like crimping beans. I know you've done some work on it and you can talk about that if you want.
Yeah.
But if you get that timing wrong and you go out there with a roller crimper on beans, you're gonna hammer the yield on those beans. So if I'm terminating late on beans, I'm doing it with chemistry and getting that cover crop with chemistry versus a chevron pattern roller.
And that's a good point, because that's one of the things I've really seen in the last couple of years. When I started looking at our weather patterns of when we get rain, when we don't get rain, when the rye is ready to crimp and what stage the beans are in. And it seems like when the rye is ready to crimp, the rain shuts off. And we got to start thinking about the stress that we put on a plant, or what the abiotic and biotic stresses of that plant are throughout the whole growing season. If we're adding more stress to that plant by crimping it with a chevron pattern and then it doesn't rain for 20 days, we just took top end yield right off. Like, we either need to come back in there and spray something on there to alleviate that stress on that bean really quick, or don't do it, type of thing. So, or maybe just go to a smooth roller. But I'm kind of really struggling a little bit with that roller crimper thing. I love it and I hate it. I've got a love-hate relationship with it.
And we mounted ours on our corn planter. We plant and roll in the same pass now. We figured out the cost. It's cost me about 12 bucks an acre, and time that I truly don't have. Like, would you rather be rolling that cover crop ahead or before, or would you rather just be in the corn planter or the bean planter and actually putting the crop in the ground? And for us, it was an easy investment. I mean, I think on our roller system, it paid us back within less than a year's worth of acres. And we had our time back and our money back from making that investment of putting that roller on the planter. Now, if you're running a stack fold, if you're running a front fold 16 row, you got to get really creative if you're going to try to put a roller system on a planter like that. But it pays for us to do it all in one pass and just be able to head down the road and keep putting acres in the ground.
So do you roll every year?
Yeah.
Every acre?
Yeah, we roll every acre every year. This last year was probably the worst cover crop we had. We had, I think they said we had like 14 inches in a day, and I had some fields that were under 14 feet of water back in January. And we had like 140 acre field that we found one cover crop brassica seed that actually lived on that entire farm, but it was under 14 feet of water for almost 2 weeks. But we put cover crops out every year. Every mix is different pretty much. We'll probably have like 4 or 5 different blends to cover the whole farm, because we have different issues that we're combating on different farms. But yeah, we roll those down and roll them at planting time on the planter now, and it's.
How did your turnips, radishes, vetch, your other stuff other than your cereals, how does that respond?
We never plant turnips into row crops, never again. I had I'm first generation, so a bunch of the equipment we bought was like junk that we had to fix up. And my first cab tractor was a Kubota 105. And if you've never been in one of those, it was not built for a man my size. And the year that we had turnips, I mean, beautiful, big old fat turnips everywhere. I bounced over every inch of that cab. The row units bounced every 2 feet, and it was the most uneven stand we've ever had. So we do not do turnips in row crop anymore. When it comes to radishes, ours winter kill, and I've moved away from radishes for that point, because we were spending like $4 to $5 an acre to get 2 pounds of radishes, the recommended rate. Or we can buy like a dwarf Essex or a buckbuster black oilseed rape for $1 a pound, and it needs to be seeded at £1 to the acre. So do we spend 5 or do we spend 1 and get the same benefit? And so we've moved away where our brassicas are typically, you know, those black oilseed rapes. We're doing 2 or 3 legumes ahead of corn. We'll do at least 1 legume ahead of beans. I don't know what your feelings are on it, but I was told for years if you put a legume cover crop out ahead of beans, it wouldn't nodulate. They're full of shit. It's the only way to say it. It works. If you're trying to get over 50, 60 bushel beans, that nitrogen has to come from somewhere. Beans can only nodulate about 300 pounds of nitrogen. That's enough to get us to about 50 bushels. If you're trying to get over that hump, you've got to either apply it or you've got to build it, or it has to come from organic matter breakdown or soil biology. And when we started putting legumes in our cover crops ahead of beans, that's when our farm average the last couple of years has been over 80 bushels. And for the area we're in, that's pretty darn good. And so we started putting in, you know, we don't really put a lot of vetch, but we'll put crimson clover, maybe mix in some winter peas. We'll put that ahead of beans, and we haven't seen that green bridging and all the stuff that I was educated on every disease and worm that was going to kill our crop if we did all this stuff. Hadn't happened yet in 12 years. So maybe year number 13 is going to be the one that gets us. I don't know, but you know, I'm all right with that.
On a tip,
Good point. Before you were talking about nutrient cycling,
Yeah.
and you're talking about rye, but you always talk about having to terminate it to get your nutrients back. So I want to strip till into standing alfalfa. Like right after first cutting, I want to go in there and strip till and plant corn. Does that living alfalfa give off nitrogen, or does it have to be terminated so it? Does a legume feed a corn plant?
No.
You have to kill the alfalfa.
Legumes.
To get your nitrogen, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, legumes don't feed corn plants. And there was this big
misconception.
There was this big misconception that if I planted a legume and interseeded in my corn, well, the corn's going to pull that off of the legume. If you do see a nitrogen benefit from that, it's because that legume has such a low carbon to nitrogen ratio. It's feeding a different subset of biology that's then helping unlock more nitrogen.
But if you kill the alfalfa, like a heavy crop.
If you kill the alfalfa, now you've got nitrogen breakdown. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's another thing with cover crops. Understand, clovers, vetches, winter peas, all of these legume cover crops are no different than a soybean plant. When you see that plant go into reproduction, it is now a net negative. You are building nitrogen until you go into reproduction. Now that cover crop is pulling nitrogen out of the soil and out of those nodules to go into reproduction and make its own seed back. So if you're trying to get maximum nitrogen production, you need to be timing that killing time for that legume cover crop right at right that change from vegetation to reproduction. That blooming, because
You want to kill that alfalfa plant the fall before, you're going to end up with corn that's awfully yellow.
yeah. And I mean, like on the alfalfa side, I don't grow alfalfa. I've worked with some alfalfa producers. We've seen a benefit of actually planting cereal rye into alfalfa the fall before and helping build back some of that carbon and build back some of that material to offset that there's just that much nitrogen out there in that field from the alfalfa. I see the hardest ground that I've ever been on was like 5 years of alfalfa.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there's so much nitrogen. That biology has to consume so much carbon to offset that, it actually starts breaking down that soil aggregation. And
one thing I wanted to address to you too is take this year out of the equation. Okay, take this year completely out. You can even take the last 3 years, but on a typical year, and you're planting corn or beans, how big is your cover crop ahead of corn? What? Huh? That crimper, a roller ain't gonna do crap with you. Don't waste your money.
hit it with a quart of Roundup, Gramoxone. Yeah.
Yep. And if you're a small enough farmer, I mean, if you only farm a couple hundred acres, 300-400 acres, you might just rig up a sprayer on your planter. Cut that cost right there, you know.
So then designing the interseed mix to benefit your corn crop
It's
season is really not a really real thing.
No, it's going to benefit your soil.
Yep.
And get that cover crop established maybe a little earlier for your next cash crop. Or if you're grazing, like in our environment, interseeding won't even work. We're just too hot. You know, you guys can do that stuff up here.
Like the relay wheat with beans interseeded in it, we've tried that in the south. We get so hot so fast. You move up into that northern Virginia, Kentucky area and start moving north in latitude, it starts working better. And we've got guys that are glutton for punishment that they've been trying it for like 4 years in the state, and they end up sacrificing one crop or the other. They either go out there and terminate the wheat because of the weeds, or they end up going out there with a different chemical and they're sacrificing those beans to save the wheat. And I don't know why anybody would save wheat.
So you got the grazing component, that's good, but if you're doing cash crop,
Yeah.
you need to target your cover crop window for before or after your main crop.
Yeah, I mean, you plant a cover crop to complement your next cash crop, not compete with it. If you have grazing in that situation, that's totally different. How many of y'all are grazers? okay, and grazing stalks or grazing on your fields. That's totally different what you can do and don't do. You know, you might throw a heavier rate of rye out there after beans that's going to corn, but you're going to graze it depending on when you harvest and everything else, or fly it on or whatever. But you know, you don't want it to compete. And that's what I see way too many times, guys on social media talk about whatever, and then other guys or go to a conference and you hear guys like me or Russell talk, well, we're going to do that. We're going to plant veg. We're going to wait till May 20th to plant corn. Well, might not always work for you guys up here, you know. You guys have an unfair advantage that actually freezes.
Yeah, the bugs.
We have mud.
Yeah, we got mud and bugs.
Yeah, we got mud year round, you know. So if we try to build nitrogen, like if you've got a small grain in your rotation, oats or something, how many of you guys raise oats? There's some market and some wheat, right? So you can't double crop beans up here, right? So what you can do is come back in with maybe that warm season mix. And if you're going to follow it up with corn afterwards, you could actually put more legume in there to build nitrogen into that soil, because it's going to freeze and it's going to hold it there. My soil, it'll be gone.
How deep's y'all's ground freeze up here? 3-4 feet? 6. My gosh.
That's deep.
They got a place called Arizona that y'all could go to in the wintertime. I'm just giving suggestions out today.
Quick question on carbonation generation backing up. Because we got a shorter growing season, brassica has become more important than just straight legumes as far as trying to rebalance that.
I think having both of them in there are more important than one or the other. And like David was saying, if you're harvesting wheat, what, August 1st?
Right now.
Yeah.
Right now.
So if you're harvesting wheat right now,
Winter wheat.
yeah. Say you get a delay because of all the wet weather you've been having. Go out there with your fall mix. You know, put some cereal rice, some triticale, some oats, some crimson clover, some winter peas. You're going to see it winter kill because it's going to get enough growth on it. But you're going to build enough in that soil, and it's not, once again, amino forms and organic forms of nutrients are a heck of a lot stabler than what we can apply as farmers. And so if we can build it, it'll be more stable in that soil profile and more available for the next growing crop.
And it got brought up here a little bit earlier about the forms of nitrogen and everything. When you really start thinking about the forms of nitrogen, where it's converted at in that plant, especially, I mean, we're talking a lot about corn here. You apply anhydrous, where's it going to be converted at? Roots. If you apply UAN, where's it going to be converted at? Leaf tissue, right? So
if you got organic nitrogen, does it have to be converted?
No, it's taken right up. But that's the thing too, is like, it doesn't have to be converted up. So it takes less energy to convert that over to a form that the plant can actually use. And we start talking about UAN, you got to have enough potassium for that plant to draw that solution into that plant. So that goes into the whole diffusion process. You got to have more potassium on the outside of the root than on the inside of the root, so it pulls in that K with that nitrate. And then once it gets in the plant, to reduce that nitrate into a form that it needs potassium again to be able to reduce it. So it takes a significant amount of potassium as well. So I mean, this is again, this goes back to a whole systems approach of farming and making sure that we're you know, Russell will talk a lot about nutrient management and what he's doing to achieve the yields he is. I mean, it's just not a throw it out all 6 months earlier and call it good. How many of you guys fall fertilize? I could save you a pile of money by switching you to spring. I guarantee it.
It's not as easy. I mean,
remember, we freeze up a couple weeks after applying it.
Do you have mag soils?
What was that?
Do you have high mag soils?
Yes.
Guess
Not
where
a
your
lot.
K is?
Not a lot.
Not a lot,
But with 2 weeks ahead of time, you're not going to tie up a lot.
well, I'm seeing advantages to guys that are actually going in and wide dropping, even in Minnesota, wide dropping potassium about right now and seeing a huge advantage in yield.
hey, you know anything about wide dropping potassium?
Yeah, I do that. Use way less K, and it actually gets in the plant. So you're saving money, using less of it. It's just the headache for the past to do it.
But think about this. We think about microbes, but chemical reactions happen in that soil. Even if it's frozen, that can still occur. So depending on, you know, Even calcium, high calcium can interact with potassium. You know, what about phosphorus? Yeah, calcium, iron, aluminum, those could all interact with your phosphorus. So you apply 100 pounds, well, literature all shows that we're only taking up maybe 30% of that, right? So
and that's if you're doing good.
That's if you're doing good. So
Yeah.
maybe you're only getting 30% at most. Well, if we apply 7 months before we plant our next cash crop, and there's an opportunity for nutrients to be tied up in there, maybe now we're only getting 10%. And guys will say, well, I'll get more the next year. Yeah, you're going to get 1% return on your investment. So this is like me saying, hey, Myron, give me $100,000. I'm going to give you 30% the first year. Would you do it?
No, sir.
Because he knows the next question. I'm only going to give you 1% after that, right? So how many of you guys fertilize for 2 crops in 1 year? You know, I think a lot of guys went away from that, but in my area, they're still doing it.
I was gonna say, back home, they'll put out enough P and K for the corn crop that year and supposedly the bean crop the next year. And our county average on beans is 28 bushels.
No wonder why.
How many of y'all would keep farming beans if you made 28 bushels? They're glutton for punishment.
That's my normal.
We need to talk.
Yeah.
So are you advocating for more spring application?
I wear my butt out in spring.
And on the spring application, there's actually, I don't know if it's still there, there's equip money to switch to spring application, so you can get paid to do it on top. So you're saving nutrition and getting it.
It's not easy. I'll be honest with you. The easiest thing would be is, hey, we're wrapping up harvest. We got a little time. Let's go put out some stuff in the fall. That's the easy button. The hard thing is you're going to wear your butt out in a tractor seat, or having somebody on your farm with the ability to also put nutrition out in the spring and also get a crop planted. And if you have really wet, you know, a really wet spring, or say you're abnormally dry and it's taking more time to get over that acre, you're going to have more issues. There is the possibility of that. It's not the easiest way to do it. But if you're looking at how to get the most amount of benefit out of the nutrition that we are applying and see that correlate into the best yields that we can get, which makes us the most money, that is the best way to do it.
This year was a bitch. Though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said earlier, I've never driven through so much water. I've never spread fertilizer in the freaking rain before. We've done it for days to get it done.
So we talked last night out here. How fast do you plant?
4.2, 4.6.
Next spring, if you don't change anything, go down to 3. No, not for the whole farm. No, not for the whole farm. But I'm saying pick half of a field and go down to 3. So we were looking at some different corn plants last night and at seeding depth. When I see seeding depth issues, more than likely he just doesn't have enough weight on the plant for the no-till conditions he's in. The other way to combat that, and one of the things that wasn't explained to me in the early years in no-till, those double disc openers are the same as the hull of a boat. What happens when we speed a boat up? It rises up in the water. So like when I have dry years, I'm planting 3-4 miles an hour. It sucks. I'd rather be running 5 or 6. But at the same time, if I run 5 or 6 and I sacrifice half of the stand because of seeding issues, leave it in the shed. And so if you don't have enough weight, or if you're too dry, slow down. Because now instead of planing that hull of the boat up on the soil, those double disc openers, we're slowing that speed down and allowing it to go to that proper depth and maintain that proper depth. I'll spend $10 on my corn planter for every $1 I spend on my combine. That is the most important piece of equipment on a row crop operation, and that is not said near enough.
I see too many people too, when it gets tough, if you have downforce, they crank up that downforce.
Yeah,
high.
and then that just raises the bar up.
It does the exact opposite of what you would think. It's kind of like if you moldboard plow with dull shear, you ain't gonna get it in the ground.
And that, we call those things, that diamond harrow, if you go in the South, they call them humdingers. I don't know why, but
Yes.
that's the name that they came up with them. But no, I don't like to do tillage. The reason I don't like to do tillage is I didn't invest money in tillage equipment, and the tillage equipment I have is small and it's shitty. But I picked up a new farm this last year, same problems that you've stated. When it's rough as can be and you can't go over that field without bouncing in that tractor cab all over the place, fix the problem and then move on. That's where it should be at. If we have an issue, fix the issue, move on, and start doing better. You don't have to ride that field for 10 years and have those issues just to say that you're a purist in no-till.
And I love strip till in corn with cover crops. I think that's a really good transition. If you've been full width tillage and you're going to go down this path, instead of beating your head on no-till and trying to make it work, maybe especially with cool wet soils, doing a little bit of strip till in the springtime isn't a bad thing, especially if you can band your nutrients right where that root mass is going to be, right? But, you know, it's...
No, go ahead. I'm going to pick on, is it Nathan? You ain't said anything. I'm going to bring you in the conversation. What's an average year like here? Average.
For
rainfall.
around 30 inches a day.
No, I mean timing. Is it really nice and spread out and even and it rains a 1/4 inch every 3rd day?
Yeah.
So how does it work up here?
Get big showers,
In this early spring, big showers.
then it shuts off.
Then it shuts off. When does it shut off?
End of June.
End of June. Man, this is kind of like home. All right, so what happens from June for the rest of the season?
Maybe get a shower.
You get a pop-up?
Yeah.
So we got a company we started working with called AquaSpy. If you've never heard of them, look them up. It's really cool technology and it's not expensive. I paid $600 for a probe that's 48 inches deep, and every 4 inches I can see root depth, I can see electric conductivity and actually map out what part of the profile my nutrients are coming out of. When it rains, I can tell you down to the 4 inches how deep that rain went in the profile. And then it also tells me how full my profile is with moisture, where my root zone is at that point in the season. The reason I'm bringing this up is June the 15th to about July the 1st, we lose 70 to 80% of the moisture in our top 4 inches. What does the soil have to have for the plant to take up the nutrients in the soil? Water. So if I'm losing all of that moisture in the top 4 inches, what happens to the nutrients in those top 4 inches? They're there, but we can't unlock them. So that's when we start looking at strip till, or the fertilizer bar that I'm going to show y'all in a little bit. And if we can start placing nutrients where we need them, where we maintain moisture throughout the later part of the growing season when it's dry, what happens to those nutrients? They're available. And so get your local co-op or a soil and water district to sponsor $2,000 and get one of these sensors out on somebody's farm in this area and start mapping out, hey, do we need to start looking at placing nutrients a little bit deeper, either with strip till or a fertilizer bar, than we do broadcasting it out? And is that going to be a better return on investment? And then when we are putting them in strip till, I mean, think about this. On a 30-inch corn row, how much of an acre are we actually using? Does anybody know that percentage? Anybody want to take a guess?
10%.
It's pretty close. We're averaging somewhere about 13 to 17% of an acre. That's it, on a 30-inch row. So if I broadcast 100 pounds of potassium over 43,560 feet and I'm only utilizing 17% of that, or 13%, or like he said, 10%, anywhere in that range, is that efficient? And then you have to look at it like if you have a shovel and you want to see it and you haven't paid attention to it on your farm, dig a plant up here. I guarantee you that those lateral roots that come off that corn plant, they're going to be at 27 degrees. A corn plant grows roots at 27 degrees. All right, and once it goes out and hits a certain point, then we start seeing them move deeper in the profile. It's 4 inches. That's the average in the United States. I've been on about 40 farms in 46 states. That corn plant will grow 4 inches of roots on either side of the plant. So are we really actually even using that 13 to 17% they say? No. We're using an 8-inch wide strip in that 30-inch row. So if we place fertility outside of that, every inch you move away, the efficiency of that fertilizer exponentially goes down. And so that's why we do a lot of 2x2x2, and we have a bar that does 3x3x3. And so we're placing those nutrients 3 inches or 2 inches to the side. The 2x2 is going 4 inches deep. Our fertilizer bar will go 4 to 6 inches deep on beans, and we'll go 6 to 8 inches deep on corn because we see a much stronger root system. And that's one of the ways that those nutrients now correlate back to yield and return on investment.
And I have a lot of guys that have done a really good job of building up their fertility levels on their soil. Guess what that does? It costs you a lot of money, right?
And then they don't see it in that tissue plant result.
Exactly. When I go out and do tissue tests, I don't see it. But when I got guys that are banding their nutrients and applying it right there, I pick it up and I see it. I mean, I'm glad you brought this up, but you kind of stole a little bit of thunder. I should have been.
Sorry.
I was going to actually do this last night, and then Walmart closes here at 11 o'clock. What the heck? Yeah. So.
It's un-American.
I know. I was going to get a 3-foot poster board, put some fertilizer on there. You know, if you think about that. If you take 100 pounds or 150 or 200 pounds of a product and broadcast it across an acre, so 43,560 square feet, how much of that 100 pounds falls on 1 square foot?
About 2 granules.
Yeah. I mean, it's like half an ounce worth. It's not much.
So how many of you guys get out and walk your fields and look at your plants? What do you see? Visually, just what do you see?
Right now?
Yeah.
Right now they look great.
They do?
Yeah.
Do you think this corn leaf looks
A
great?
few weeks ago they didn't look very good.
Does this corn leaf look great?
Looks a little yellow.
You think it's deficient in something?
Probably.
What about this one? All right, I'll put them side by side. Which one looks better? This one looks better?
Yeah.
All right, this is a finished leaf. This one's not growing anymore. This one was the top leaf. Do you know what it is? Come here, I'm gonna show you something. I'll educate you something today. You ever ran a tissue test?
Not yet, no.
All right, how many people here have ever ran a tissue test? All right, how many forms of nitrogen does a corn plant typically take up? Anybody have a wild guess?
3.
Okay. All right, how many forms of sulfur do we have in a corn plant? I know of 2. One works, the other one's just pretty much there for the party. How many forms of iron do we have? And the only reason I'm bringing this up is there's been like 15 emails that I've had in the last week, and we've been educating people on this. All right, so if you look through this corn plant, or through this leaf,
Yep.
All right, you've got your main vein right here in the middle.
Yep.
See all your secondaries?
Yep.
You see how you can't really see much sunlight between the secondary veins?
Mm-hmm.
This one's really good. How much sunlight can you see through that?
A lot more.
All right, so if we're wasting sunlight, what are we doing?
Not converting it.
We're wasting energy. The way that we push nutrients into this plant is through what process? We learned this in the 3rd grade. Photosynthesis, which makes, and what's the C word? Chlorophyll. All right. So there's 15 farmers in the last week that sent me tissue test results. All their iron levels came back in the sufficiency range. Is this plant sufficient in iron? No. So we as farmers can apply 10 ounces on most fields and actually see a huge economical return, because what are we wasting at this point? And the reason I showed you both leaves is look at any corn plant near you. If you look at any corn plant near you, the upper leaves all look like this one, because what's this leaf doing? It's growing, it's elongating. That means that our plant is not converting iron to the form that it needs to actually make these not translucent. Look deeper in the canopy at the finished leaves. Do you see it? Once that leaf stops growing and it's not using as much iron, the plant's able to stabilize that leaf. This is just a visual indicator. Now, tissue tests, we do them every week on the farm. We're mapping out every field every week. We're seeing where we see dips, any kind of potential problems later in the season. It takes 5 or 6 years if you want to do a whole farm. Like, I'm not saying you should do every single field every single year like that. We probably pick out 20% of our fields, they get tissued every week, and then we can map that log out depending on that crop. But
Iron deficiency, is that because it's not in the soil, or is that because it's locked up and not consumed?
it's in the soil, but we have Fe2 and Fe3, and the plant has to make a conversion to actually use that iron. And that's the problem, is that conversion of the unavailable iron to the plant available iron. And when we can take an iron sulfate at 10 ounces, which is going to cost us, I don't know, y'all get stuff a lot cheaper up here for some reason. Equipment, fertilizer, I'm envious of you, that and the black dirt you have. But, you know, for me, I'm spending $1.60 an acre, and we're maximizing photosynthesis, chlorophyll, and we start actually putting, because how does a corn plant work? It puts nutrients on, then it cannibalizes and moves those nutrients in. So if we're wasting energy right now, have we maximized the concentration of nutrients in that plant? No. And so if you can correct that for $1.60 or even $2, what if it's $5? What if it's a bushel and a quarter and we're seeing a 10, 20 bushel increase? Because this right here, it's like he said, the law of the minimum. This right here is a minimum in this field. And I'm not trying to pick on Grant. I'm educating y'all that these are things that you don't have to pull a tissue sample to see.
I can guarantee you can drive across the country and see that
In about every field.
in about every field. All right. So show of hands again. How many of y'all tissue sampled before? How many of y'all quit because you didn't see anything out of it? How many of y'all just did it one time throughout a growing season? If you're going to do it just one time, don't even waste your time doing it.
We don't know what to look for. How do you read it?
You do now.
This man right here just developed some. He's got.
My question would be with respiration in the soil, aeration, wouldn't that oxidize that iron into the proper form?
No, we don't want we don't want iron oxide.
We want it
You want it
reduced.
non-oxidized.
Yep. So I did develop this. So here's your disclaimer for the day. I developed this and I have an interest in it. But my interest is that I want to see farmers make money. I developed a program over the last 5 years and we just made it commercially available this year. You're going to see one of our reports today of a Minnesota farmer. I took their name off of it for anonymity. I think I said that right. But you used to pull a tissue test and it was like, hey, you're sufficient in this and you're high in this and you're low in this and go pack sand. That's pretty much what a tissue test told you. There was no management decision to be had. So over the last 5 years and with the use of AI technology, now you can pull a tissue test and for 13 cents an acre, that's how much we're charging farmers. It's literally the bare minimum for us to house the data, is you can actually get back and it'll say you're low on iron and you need to apply 42 ounces of a 4.5% iron. Well, what if your co-op doesn't sell it? I don't care where you buy your fertilizer from. You can log in online and say your co-op sells a 9% iron. You can click a drop box and change it to 9% and it's going to change that ounce that you're going to have to spray to the acre. You're low on potassium. It's going to tell you need to apply X number of ounces to the acre of potassium acetate. Well, what if you got a 20%? Well, same thing. You can change it from a 24 down to a 20%. And now, like a soil sample would tell us how many pounds of nutrients that we needed to apply to the soil. Well, now we have a management decision on how many ounces we need to apply to a plant to correct a deficiency. So there's new tools and this AI technology that's coming out that really is giving us farmers a lot more management decisions, and we can do it without breaking the bank. Because how many of you hear foliar fertilizer? Anybody? Hey, what's your name?
My name's Andrew.
All right, Andrew. You ever spray potassium?
Nope.
What do you foliar spray?
Biology.
Well, that's not helping me. Who else foliar spray? All right, what do you spray? You spray fertility?
Coron and K-leaf.
All right, well, I'm not going to pick on them, but K-leaf. What does the label of K-leaf say is a recommended rate for you to spray? What's the?
I just know this off the top of my head.
Well, I was figuring you would maybe.
There's a lot of other nonsense in there.
I buy fertility products from about 4 or 5 companies. I'm not brand specific. I'm going to give you an example. I'm not picking on them. They make some good products. Concept Agritech. They've got a product called K24. It's a 24% potassium acetate. If you read their label, it says apply 1 to 6 quarts. I kept calling the dealer up and I said, which one's right? That's my point. A quart cost me $2, 6 quarts cost me, $12. Same thing with zinc. You read a zinc label from most manufacturers. Hey, apply 1 to 5 quarts. Which one's right? Because one, I'm paying a lot more money than the other. And the only response I ever got back was it depends on if I'm buying or selling. That's really the only way I was told how to know what the recommended rate was. And so that's what I'm saying is there's technology that's coming out for our generation of farmers that the older generation didn't have that we can utilize and get stuff down to the ounce and really cut back on only what's needed. Because you look at some of these guys that have been chasing high yield and you look at the kitchen sink approach, and being too high is just as bad as being too low. And then it doesn't even take into consideration all the ratios that me and David have talked about a little bit. So when you start looking at too high, too low, and the ratios in between, there's a lot of factors that go into that versus looking at a jug and figuring out whether you're going to spray 1 or 6 ounces or 1 or 6 quarts.
I'm just curious in your opinion through your journey. I'm not sure exactly how it went. Have you seen correlation as far as weed pressure with you owning things kind of, have you seen any correlation there?
So when I first started farming, I was a YouTube junkie, and everybody told me that the best way to correlate yield to a field was organic matter. What we've seen now after 12 years, organic matter, and I don't know, y'all had some data on it too at your meeting that I heard. Organic matter is right about 60% of the time. Water extractable organic carbon gets you within about 93%. So you can start looking at a correlation of what is your water extractable organic carbon in a field, and start looking at what that field yielded, and if you have a different one in another field, and those will actually correlate closer than organic matter. As far as weed pressure goes and nutrient cycling, when we first started using the Haney test, we were at like 60 and 80 respirations. Our highest yielding fields now are 400 or 500. Percent max have went from 60, 70, 80% to some of them now, they'll stay above 200%. And that's necessarily not a good thing, but it's not a bad thing. The only bad thing about that percent max going up is you're essentially going to break down organic matter. Organic matter is 51, 52% carbon. And when they eat all that weoc, they'll start breaking down organic matter. We don't want to see a huge dip in organic matter, but we know that there's a lot of nutrition in that organic matter too. So once again, biology is just, you know, they're spoon feeding that crop. Weed pressure, the more our organic nitrogen, so like the Haney test looks at nitrate, ammonium, we're looking at organic nitrogen as well. As we see inorganic nitrogen and organic nitrogen either become balanced, or we see organic nitrogen above inorganic nitrogen, less weed pressure, we see better nitrogen efficiency. You know what David was talking about earlier, if you're a corn plant and you take up synthetic nitrogen and you're converting that over to an amino acid form, you're using sunlight, chlorophyll, which drives nutrient uptake, so we're having less of that happen in the plant, and it also uses water. So when we go through the dry years, like this year specifically, our corn stresses less because it's easily taking up more nitrogen that consumes less energy and less moisture than if we would have applied all of those pounds of nitrogen. So there's a lot of factors that go into really maximizing a healthy soil series.
It's kind of interesting in my area. We've been fighting a lot of little barley, it's called. So it looks like barley, but it's a little bitty.
Them
it's
little
spindly.
stickers. Fuck.
Yes, to get in your socks. That's why, Russ, I don't, yeah. But it's horrible, right? And so it'll take out a cover crop. Like literally, it'll smother out cover crops that we seed in fall time. And we start analyzing the soil test a little bit more and looking at our calcium magnesium ratios, and our mag is just off the charts high. And that's what that loves, you know? So there are things about it that, you know, we got to change up a little bit.
Did you have a question?
We started talking about foliar feeding now, and you talk about a quart per acre, 2 quarts. But if you got a row crop and you're broadcasting, right? So 50% that hits the ground and 50% hits the plant, because we got, if not, do you put an extra quart on because you're only hitting 50%? Are we trying to hit the soil, or are you trying to hit the plant?
I think we paid almost $2,000 and we replumbed our entire sprayer on 15-inch center nozzles. And when I'm foliar spraying, I actually block off my row middles. I'm concentrating all of that spray on the plant. The only exception to that is we started using a drone 4 years ago now, and the vortices on that drone, and that's what we were talking about last night. If you can get nutrition on the bottom side of this leaf, it is a heck of a lot more efficient than the top side of the leaf. And when we're using the drone and that vortices is actually spinning that nutrition, we're seeing just as much coverage on the bottom of the leaf when we're running it properly than we are on the top of the leaf. And so that right there kind of negates that issue. Now, it depends on the crop height. If this corn would have been V2, V4, and it's really small, you're going to want to use 8002, 8003 nozzles, very fine mist. You want to essentially fog that plant and try to get as much carrier in the air so that it floats on this plant. You get a plant this tall and you're coming out here and you're spraying, you know, 20, 30 inches above the crop canopy, you're still going to get some in the row middles, but very little comparable.
I got a question on tissues.
Yep.
How do you guys, you know, as you get taking them, I could pull one from that plant right there and pull one from that plant right there. They're going to look, they could look very similar because the biomass. So how do you make sure that you're not getting that confused? If you just look at the tissue without ever going to the field, you could take 2 tissues from good and bad plants and they may look very similar,
How big is this field?
16 acres.
All right, so this is a 16-acre field. And to answer your question, if our AB lines were this direction, I always walk at a 45-degree angle to my AB line so that we don't pick up a hot pass. We don't pick up, you know, hot pass on the spreader truck or the fertilizer bar. We don't pick up a hot pass on the foliar spray. And you're taking 25, 30, you know, leaf samples from this end of the field to the other end of the field, and it's just a composite of that field. Now, if you have a problem area, say the area that we're standing in, if it was yellow and dead and it's, you know, 50 by 50, I would leave this out and maybe pull a tissue in this area to see what this problem is, but then pull my composite from the rest of the field. Pulling tissue samples is very subjective to the person pulling them. And that's why I'll tell you right now, I pull my own tissue samples, I pull my own soil samples, and I make my own fertility recs. Because the last thing I'll ever do on my farm ever again is let the man that makes my fertilizer cells make my soil, you know, my fertility recommendations. We did that one year with Southern States. We pulled our own, and when we started traveling and speaking and going to conferences, I knew I probably needed somebody to help me, so we hired them to do half of our acres that I had already done to see what we came up with. And their fertilizer recommendation was almost 60 grand higher. And so that right there pretty much told me, and they were like, well, we only charge $7 for this soil sample. You know, it's a cheap soil sample. Hell yeah, that's how they hook you. And then they're gonna sell you another 60, 100 grand worth of fertilizer that you don't really need. And so I would just say, make sure that you're pulling it at an angle and that you're pulling a different representation of the field for every one of those composite leaves.